Welcome to the Happy Market Research Podcast, your favorite place for strategies, stories, and insights from the world of market research. Brought to you by your host, Dan Fleetwood.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Happy Market Research Podcast. I am your host, as always, Dan Fleetwood. And here today, I have Kelsy Saulsbury. She is Client Insights Director at H&R Block. Kelsy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So for those who might not know about you or your background and what you do, can you give a quick introduction so folks can get a little bit more familiar?
Absolutely. So currently I lead the consumer insights and research team at H&R Block. So this includes kind of your classic market research, strong partnerships with strategy and across the organization, and then also the voice of customer kind of CX platform. So all of those kind of surveys and closed loop processes. Prior to H&R Block, I actually worked in insights and analytics and even led kind of pricing strategy and work with Johnson & Johnson in MedTech, focused on ophthalmology and vision care. Have worked in frozen food. I've worked at Hallmark Cards, a number of places, but mostly in consumer insights and understanding. A little bit of an eclectic background that I worked for a while as a frontline manager in a manufacturing plant. I've worked in a creative organization. So a little bit of an eclectic background, but most of my career has been in insights and analytics.
All right. Thank you for that, Kelsy. I'm curious around your background and any expertise or current projects you're working on. What comes to mind? Like, what are you most passionate about in the research and in the research space? Can you shed a little bit of light on that for me?
I think my passion has always just been learning my entire life, even as a child. I actually just love learning and I'm a curious person, which probably is what led me to a career in consumer insights, right? A pretty natural connection. I'd say one of the big passions, though, is really just how do we help just businesses make better decisions? And what are all the ways that we do that? And sometimes it's, really, it doesn't have to always be innovative. I know we're going to talk a bit about innovation today, but right now I'm working on an attrition study where we compare people who leave and people who stay. And I always find attrition studies are a very standard thing. Lots of companies do them, but when you do them well and really understand the happy path and the sad path, there's so much impact to an organization. Just wrapping up kind of year 2 of this study, but last year, not only did the study influence, product and service development, but it was actually included in training materials for our tax professionals, for our receptionists, for our field leaders. It was in workshop training for our field leaders that I was able to lead with other field leadership. So to see studies just have that kind of impact, I think that's what gets me really excited.
Yeah, that's exciting. And it's probably neat to see research you did in these materials and people using them and utilizing them. That's really interesting. Now, you said something that I want to go back to. You said if they can do these studies well, like, what do you think when you say well, like, what do you mean by that? Is it like the setup? Is it how you analyze the results? I'm kind of curious if we can dive in there just a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for something that you do a lot, well, kind of means what is the twist you've done to make it feel new? And without that twist to make it feel new, then it starts to just feel like a tracking study. And tracking studies are important, but most of us as researchers could write our tracking studies before you run the study.
That's true.
Right?
Yep, that's so true.
So those don't always bring new insight, or they do. There's one change that we really, picked out, and that's really the important thing. But sometimes by doing something like attrition in a slightly different way or with a slightly different lens or digging in somewhere a little bit deeper, you unlock something new. So maybe they're all done well, but if you're not unlocking something new, then you don't see as much change within the organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it probably is unlocking something new. It's interesting because, you said you can do these tracking studies, but if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, then what's the point, right? So you want to have that new unlock. And, kind of transitioning here into some different trends and insights. So speaking of something new, what's sort of the biggest change that you've seen in the research industry over the past few years?
I mean, I think what we're all talking about is AI, right? I think AI is the big thing that we're talking about. I think some parts of it don't feel as new. Like we've always had new things and new tools, but I think with AI, like the speed is quickening. I
Hmm.
think some of the sophistication, maybe making it even easier for more people to do research like activities than they could before. Um,
Right.
so, so it's been happening for a long time, but I think that rate of acceleration and the sophistication of it is what I really feel is changing.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think, I've been in the industry for a while, and I know you have as well. Research has been like notoriously slow to adopt new technologies, I would say. um, but it's interesting just at the rate, and you mentioned this of that we've adopted AI, and I haven't seen anything like this in my 10 years in the research space. I'm curious, like, why do you think that is? Is it just like the power of it and the vastness, or what sort of things do you contribute to why it's taken on so quickly?
Can't speak for the whole industry, but I guess from
Yeah,
my perspective of
yeah,
where I work and where I sit, I
yeah,
I think because we can't afford not to.
yeah, yeah.
All kinds of industries, all kinds of things internally are embracing this, right? I
Hmm.
can't be in an organization where the IT team and programmers are asked to be vibe coding and asking to be doing all
Yeah,
of these things, but we're going to sit and research and be like, oh, it doesn't apply to us. I
right.
don't think you could get away with that in organizations anymore. Or if you can, I don't know how long that's going to hold.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned it's a technology that's really taken over a lot of organizations from top to bottom, right? Not just
Mhm.
in the research space. So I think that might be one of the biggest differences there. I'm curious, around AI and the democratization of research. Um, I want to spend a few few minutes here. We're seeing AI put research capabilities into the hands of people, as we were talking about, where they were never trained as researchers, marketers, product managers, founders, etc. What's your take on that shift, and what should we do about it?
I think my first take is it's not entirely new,
Hmm.
right? If I go back 15 plus years ago at Hallmark Cards, we had what we called Consumer Thursdays, right? Very old school. We brought consumers into our building. We did focus groups with the business partners right there. And we were
Hmm.
doing this on a regular basis. So pretty soon, just for practicality, you can't do everything by yourself. So I've got writers taking notes and writing reports. I've got creative directors moderating the focus groups. I've got folks in doing pieces of this.
Hmm.
Um, if I think about working at Johnson and Johnson, and for any of our friends in med tech or pharma, your product teams, your marketers, they're talking to doctors every single day. So they're talking to the
Hmm.
consumers every single day, right?
Right.
They're running ad boards all the time. So it's already happening in pockets,
Hmm.
some pieces of it. But I think again, it's really that the scale that can happen with AI, maybe greater access. And then I think the more interesting thing, which is where we have a lot to unpack, is the
Hmm.
confidence and sometimes false confidence of AI.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Let's dive into that. I'm curious around the confidence and false confidence. What do you mean by that? And let's dive into that a little bit more.
I think for me, sometimes the things you see with AI, they look really slick. They look really refined. They look like it can look like a really thought out perspective.
Yep.
And AI always sounds confident.
Yep, that's true.
Right? It always
Hmm.
sounds confident. So, an example I've seen where a team's like, had a big question, so went to kind of the research archives, pulled a slide here and a slide there, put it into a deck, put the deck into AI, and have AI create an entire framework about a certain customer.
Hmm.
Except when you trace back, the source documents were about a different customer group, not the
Oh,
customer group of the framework.
oh no.
Or you trace back and they've put this huge file in our case into Copilot, but Copilot tends to focus on the first 25 slides, not an entire 150. So if you don't break it up when you do your analysis, it's going to focus on certain pieces.
Hmm.
It's going to do the other things we see AI do, right? It's really going to round to the middle, which sometimes that's fine. But if we've lost the edge cases, have we lost the nuance? And is that where the insight could have lived?
Right, right.
But it looks super professional. And without digging in, you don't know that maybe the inputs weren't even correct, right? Maybe this wasn't analyzed in the pieces in the way it needed to be. So I think that's where the false confidence for me can kind of come into play.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's why it's always important to have a human in the loop too, right? Because to your point, if you didn't look at this and you just sent it out there, there wouldn't be any sort of rigor or any guardrails there, right? So I think that's definitely important of just having that human that can review and fact check and just make sure things are correct. I'm curious around as more non-researchers get into utilizing AI for research, is the risk like the quality and rigor, or where would you put this in terms of like, is that the biggest problem for non-researchers using AI, or is there's something else that you can think of?
I think for me, some of the risk depends a little bit more on kind of the broader like learning system, right? So
Yeah.
we're really democratizing, if we're really thinking like continuous discovery, and if folks are doing stuff all the time, if they're always talking to customers and they're doing things on a regular basis, then I think the risk is lower because you're doing lots of stuff. And if you're doing lots of stuff, if an individual thing wasn't perfect, wasn't as rigorous, but you're iterating and continuing to learn over time, I think we'll catch it
Yeah.
over time. And then I'm
Yeah.
kind of less worried because along the way, we're going to catch those issues. If you're just doing a one-off thing and calling it good, that is probably a lot greater risk than if it's part of like an entire system. So I think for me, the trick with democratization is how do you build that entire system for an organization,
Yeah.
and continuously, of course, work with people. So training becomes important, coaching becomes important, guardrails are important. Even though like not perfect research gets us very worked up as researchers, I kind of get more worried on the compliance and privacy and data issues that are probably a bigger
Yeah.
risk for organizations if done wrong from a legal
Yeah.
perspective.
Sure. Sure.
Are you building the right system for all of those things? Then imperfection in certain places, I think, isn't as big a risk.
Yeah, that's good. I liked what you said around building systems around it. It's not like you're just going to put this in the hands of non-researchers and they're going to, go off to the races and do whatever they want. If you have the right systems in place, then that's kind of the guardrails there, right? So, what are
Absolutely.
some of those like practical steps, like in terms of putting a system in place? Is it like training on research and then they can go and utilize AI, or is it something different that you're kind of thinking about?
Definitely, I think several pieces. So I think one is like developing a tiered system, ideally, saying like what types of research does it make sense to really democratize and make available for people. So if it's kind of validation, if it's simpler things, then there's a space where probably with a bit of training, people really can be free to go. Are there things that are a little bit more in the medium space, and maybe a researcher should just take a look before you do it, give a bit of
Mm-hmm.
consulting and make sure you're on the right track. And then there's those things that really need the expertise and rigor of your professional researchers, your generative foundational research, your more advanced analyses and techniques. So I think a tiered approach is one way. Absolutely training. And I think, we're still working to set up everything we need, but also having kind of
Right.
developing training paths, right? Because even for folks that are getting into research, there can be kind of beginner level, intermediate level, like how do we kind of step
Of course.
into
Yeah.
to more and more things. And then of course the guardrails in terms of access and compliance, like how do we make sure things are done in a compliant way? How do we make sure that we're constantly protecting, PII and private data of our consumers? I
Mm-hmm.
can't say we're good consumer advocates if we're not also doing that and making sure that happens within our organization. So I think those are
Right.
all things to kind of consider in kind of building the learning system.
Yeah, no, that's good. And then as, you know, people and organizations get more access to do their own research, what does the role of a trained researcher look like? Does it shrink in this world? Does it become more important? What do you think about that?
I, I think that the execution layer is probably shifting. both
Hmm.
with democratization, but also with AI. Like, where can we build agents and where can agents do things? Where are we democratizing? So I think that execution layer is shifting. And I think this can be a challenge for some people. If you see your value as I'm a researcher or I run studies, then this
Yeah.
is pretty scary.
Hmm.
But for me, I've always thought my role is to make other people better at their job and to help the organization make better decisions.
Hmm.
And if that's truly my job, there is lots of opportunity.
That's a good
And
point. Yeah.
these things really just allow me to perhaps accelerate and amplify the impact I can have in the organization.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there's huge opportunity in terms of coaching and consulting, setting those standards, building those systems, bringing in the right tools, shepherding your library or your repository of knowledge, working to make sure the quality is great. Um,
Hmm.
so maybe the influence changes and looks different, but it's still there. So I think I would really recommend, instead, don't defend territory, but instead reframe your value for the organization.
Yeah, that's good. I think yeah, I like what you said. It depends on how you're looking at it, right? If you're looking at it, how can I bring the most value to the organization? Then, yeah, it's a no brainer. Then it's, oh, I just run studies. Then that might shift for sure, but your overall value is still there. So that's good. I'm curious around like any examples of good or cautionary tales around AI democratized research. Have you seen it play out in practice, like good or bad? I know you mentioned an example earlier, but I'm curious if you have any others that you can share.
I think one challenge I'm seeing in like the AI portion, maybe there's a couple of
Hmm.
ways to look at it.
Okay.
One thing that I'm seeing a lot of is people across our organization playing with agents and using agents to build personas to help kind of with research based on
Hmm.
kind of our internal data. On the one hand, it's like great, they're leaning into learning agility, they're trying things out, they're clearly showing an interest in the organization. And so I don't know if it's cautionary, but it's more like a watch out, right?
Yeah, that's
Because
good.
then
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe I would rather my team build those particular agents because
Hmm.
we're going to make sure all the right inputs are in. But it's also a sign that maybe we're not moving fast enough. If other
Right.
people in the organization are building tools we should build faster than we are, that's probably a wake up call that we need to move more quickly.
Hmm.
And that's kind of an example of some of what I've seen. I think the other thing I'm seeing is all of these great research tools adding in AI, many of them still really for researchers and not quite ready for true democratization for
Hmm.
a couple of reasons. One, sometimes even when I get in, they're not so super easy. I would be able to just like say, here, everybody go for it. Most are
Sure.
not quite that easy. The second thing I think that holds us up is like the business models of a lot of the research tools and startups and things out there aren't set up for democratization. If I'm paying for every single license. So
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like I found a tool that I think this is a tool I probably would democratize, but it's $10,000 a license. I can't even afford a license for everyone on my team.
Right. Right.
So it's not really a democratized tool. Like what's truly democratized? Microsoft Forms, that is truly democratized.
Sure. Sure.
So
Well, that
we're
makes. I
advanced,
mean, yeah.
not really that advanced.
Yeah. You bring up a good point. I mean, you can do all the things that you want, but if the tool doesn't allow for it, then you're kind of you're back to square one. So that makes sense too, and that's even sometimes out of your control. As much as you'd want to, put more people in positions to do their own research and things, sometimes you just can't because of the limitations outside of your organization.
Mhm.
So that's interesting. I was curious around, pretend you're advising a company rolling out AI research tools broadly. What's one thing you tell them not to skip on?
When I think about the training, I think it's really important to for people to understand how the model really behaves. I think that's the part. Like I've been to lots of training on prompt engineering, and now there's training on making playbooks or making agents. But sometimes we skip that, like, what's really the kind of like mental model behind the model,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Are we all aware that it's going, at least most of the systems today, at least if kind of your chat GPT or Gemini or Copilot, it's going to round to the middle. And you need to know it's going to round to the middle. And if you have a business question where rounding the answer to the middle is the right thing for the organization and that's where you're going to take action, then great. But if it's a business question where the edge cases matter, now we have a problem before we've even started.
Right.
Or understanding that it's going to sound confident, or how to check your sources. So I think just some of like, how does the model work, and making sure people get that so they really know what the biases are. Like, I really wish a lot of the models did a better job of saying, here's my biases so you can check these.
Right.
They don't always do that. So I think that's kind of one part of the training curriculum that, at least for me, has been an unlock. When I've understood some of that, then I'm using the AI in better ways and I'm knowing where to check.
Yeah, that's interesting. It is a good disclaimer that they could put in there of like, this is where we excel and where we don't. It's almost like a personality test for agents, or something. I like that. I'm curious around a piece of advice that you'd give someone looking to improve their research, whether it's with AI or just in general, like that piece of advice that you tell someone that just wants to get better at their job and in the research field.
I mean, and speaking, from brand and client side, since that's where my career's been.
Yeah.
Very analog: build relationships, get to know your partners, get to know the business. It's not always as much. The research is like a tool. That's our tool in our toolbox, and it's a toolbox we know really well. But influencing the business is about building those relationships. Then you really know what's in their mind, what's keeping them up at night. Even if no one's asking for a formal project, you know that. You can maybe get ahead of that. This allows you to become the person they call earlier. This allows you to create better research because you know what's going on, and this increases the chances that the work you do is going to be used. So I think build relationships is my number one advice.
Yeah, that's good. I think in research and just in general, right? When you're, if you want to test the waters, or you get, have to move on, career transitions, different things, like the networking and talking to people is always a really big thing. So I think that's fantastic advice. In terms of like a book or podcast that's helped shape the way you think about research, is there anyone that comes to mind, or I'm curious?
I think what's top of mind for me right now, which is just one of several even in our organization that we talk about a lot, would be Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. So, because that really does lean in and talk a lot about, democratization and having product teams, engineers, designers, PMs really leaning in and doing that continuous discovery. And I think it helps to reinforce what I've mentioned in terms of like, if you're doing it all the time, then a bit of imperfection doesn't matter as much. So I think that's a helpful perspective if you're in kind of this democratization space.
Interesting. I haven't heard of that one, so I'll have to check that out for sure. That sounds interesting. If listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, where should they go? Where you point them to LinkedIn or someplace else?
Absolutely, to LinkedIn is perfect. And then, interestingly enough, I have a very uniquely spelled name. So generally, if you write my name correctly in a Google search, the only person you can find is me. So
nice. I like that. That's good. Great. Well, hey, Kelsy, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that's listening. I would encourage you to subscribe, follow, and reach out to us. I know Kelsey's on LinkedIn. I'm there as well. So feel free to reach out. And most important, share this if you got any value out of it. We would really appreciate that. Well, Kelsy, thanks again for coming on. And really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been great.